I'd love to call up the next panel. Folks, you were in for a real treat. This is like the Avengers. We've got Matt Sharp with Alliance Defending Freedom, Andrew Beckwith with Massachusetts Family Policy, and Joseph Backholm with the Chuck Colson Center. Would you all give them a round of applause? Y'all have a seat. Okay, well, quick introduction, and I didn't really make notes because I have the privilege of knowing each one of these gentlemen. Andrew is our counterpart in Massachusetts, and so y'all have heard us talk about how it is such a fight at the Texas Capitol for our values. Imagine being in a far left blue state standing up for faith, family, and freedom. That is what Andrew does every single day in Massachusetts. So please give him a round of applause.
I'm actually here to seek asylum, if that's possible.
Yeah, we fully accept you. But Andrew also has a legal background, and you're going to hear more about some of the incredible work he's doing. Matt Sharp is also an attorney, senior counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom. I feel like we have y'all on like speed dial during the legislative session. It's true. But they do incredible work in helping give legal counsel to our organization when it comes to advancing religious freedom issues and privacy issues, protecting pro-family values. They have, y'all did the Jack Phillips, I could name off a million cases y'all have done, but y'all did the Jack Phillips case at the United States Supreme Court where they were successful. Matt worked on that case. Y'all are also working on the Harris Funeral Home case that's about to go up before the United States Supreme Court. Y'all have done so many different court cases, but it's just wonderful having friends that we can call and not just ask for legal counsel, but also ask for, hey, what's the big picture of what's going on within the nation? Because they're so involved with what's happening throughout the nation, they're able to give us some incredible advice on, hey, we can foresee 2 steps ahead of where maybe this wording in a bill might need to be tweaked. So, here's an idea of how you can look at that, because this is what it would look like in court. Just a thought, just some great advice. And then Joseph, he has sought asylum for real. Before he came to the Chuck Colson Center, he was the family policy director for the state of Washington. So the Barronelle Stutzman case.
Thank you.
So he has been on the front lines in another very difficult state, but is now in a really cool position with the Chuck Colson Center, where he is creating some incredible videos to help educate the church to be able to talk about difficult issues with the culture wars. So, like I said, you've got the Avengers up here. It's going to be great to have y'all. But I want to dive in and let y'all do most of the talking. Let's start with Matt. Can you give us just a quick synopsis of what you're seeing in regards to attacks on the family issues throughout the nation?
Sure. So let me start off with a little framework. We all know that this is not just sort of a battle of flesh and blood. There's a spiritual component to it. And I always go back to the first few chapters of Genesis and the institutions that God created. He starts off and he creates male and female, distinct but complementary. He then unites them together. They become one flesh in a lifelong union. And then he tells them, go, be fruitful, and multiply. Have children, raise them in these values, and then let them multiply and grow. And that's how the whole foundation of government and everything is supposed to be built upon those institutions. All of the attacks, not all, the vast majority of the attacks we have been seeing in the past several decades have been on these institutions, on marriage, on what it means to be male and female, and on the ability of parents to train their children, impart those values, to have children, even as it comes to the abortion attacks. So some of the big battles going on we're seeing are on these issues. So one example is parental rights. and the ability of parents to be able to instill values in their kids, to affirm their biological sex. This is popping up a lot in the adoption and foster care context. So you've got a lot of organizations, faith-based adoption providers, that believe, consistent with the Bible's teachings, that the best environment that they can place a child into is one with a married mother and father. It provides stability, it provides love to children that have already experienced a lot of brokenness. But the government and others are coming after those organizations, saying, no, you cannot place children in what you believe is the best environment. You have to be willing to place them with same-sex couples or in other homes that do not serve these children best. And so this is an attack not just on the freedom of those faith-based providers, but on the underlying belief that a married mother and father provide the best environment to raise a child. And similarly on that issue is starting to tell parents, if you welcome a child into your home and that child is struggling with questions about their orientation or their identity, you have no choice but to affirm their misconceptions. So if you've got a young 5-year-old boy that you welcome into your home, a foster care child, and that child is, obviously has experienced a lot of grief and tragedy, and they're having questions, and this young boy thinks he's a girl, the state is telling these parents, you must affirm them in that misconception and that deception. You must be willing to provide them puberty blocks or hormones and even surgery as they progress, all against what is in the best interest of that child. So I think to your question, a lot of these battles are going to the ability of parents, not just natural parents, but foster care and adoptive parents, to be able to train children up and raise them and affirm God-given truths about sexuality, marriage, and what it means to be male and female.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Matt, and I think it's so important for y'all to understand. You heard what Matt's talking about, this idea that we should force parents to affirm a misconception their child has about their identity. And that sounds like, that would be far off in maybe Massachusetts. Folks, this session, Mary Elizabeth and I were in the Juvenile Justice Committee, and there are members in the Texas legislature that were telling CPS, shouldn't you force a parent to affirm the child's identity? Shouldn't a child be taken away if the parents don't affirm that child's identity, even if the child identifies as the opposite sex? And I'm not saying that they were just asking questions. It was an aggressive attempt to tell CPS, you need to be taking children away if their parents aren't affirming their identity. Yeah. That's this session in Texas. This is not in a far off state. So what Matt is telling you is happening across the country, but it's also happening right here. So, Andrew, I think of Boston, I think of Massachusetts, the cradle bed of liberty, so important, but we're seeing where some really radical ideology is taking place in that state, and it's the ripple effects that it's having throughout the nation. We're seeing it every day. And so tell us what you're seeing on the front lines in Massachusetts and how you're combating that.
Sure. So, it is pretty rough up there, especially along the lines that Matt was talking about with parental rights and these issues of gender identity, which are so new. And yet, all the major medical institutions in Boston, which is really a hub for world-class medical care, they're all on board with this gender identity ideology. So Boston Children's Hospital has a gender clinic. Boston Medical Center has a clinic. The acronym is CATCH, C-A-T-C-H. I think it's Child and Teen Clinic, but so it's focusing on youth and performing not only puberty blocker injections and cross-sex hormonal injections, but also ultimately surgery to amputate healthy organs in order to appease a troubled mind. And they're aggressively pushing this. And that works its way into custody issues. We had a bill that popped onto our legislative radar in 2013. And we were trying to fight that since that time. It was a counseling ban, similar to what passed a year earlier in California, which basically says any type of therapy treatment to dissuade someone, a child, from embracing either a homosexual or a cross-gender identity would cause the therapist to lose their license, essentially be prohibited by the state. Now, in Massachusetts, our version had another section to it that said that this type of these change efforts, sexual orientation or gender identity change efforts, would also be classified statutorily as child abuse by the state. So if this law had passed as written, it would be fine to take a 16-year-old girl, have her get puberty blockers, cross-sex hormone injections, set her up for a double elective mastectomy, and then bottom surgery down the line. I won't go into that here. I might get shot. It's Texas. And it's pretty gruesome stuff. That's fine. That's celebrated. No problem. But if you had a counselor talking to that young woman, helping her to literally feel comfortable in her own body, that would have been classified as child abuse. And so the counselor would lose their license, and the parents could lose their child. So I started trying to warn people that the state is laying the legal foundation to take away your daughter and make her someone else's son. And so we saw that actually occur in Ohio a couple years ago, where a family had a 17-year-old daughter who identified as male. The family wanted to get her counseling. They didn't want to do hormones and all that, and the state took custody away. And I've been working with a family in Massachusetts who's facing a similar situation now with a 15-year-old girl. So this is real.
And just to go off of that, there was a similar bill filed this session that would actually take away a counselor's license when dealing with a minor, even if the minor comes and says, look, I'm a Christian 13-year-old, I'm struggling with my identity. I want you as a Christian counselor to give me biblical counseling on these issues. What does God say about them? This bill would have taken away the license of the counselor, even if the client wanted that help, that biblical help. That bill was actually heard in a committee in Texas this session. Thankfully, that bill did not go any further. And we're so thankful for that. All of the bills that banned the Bible bills that would have put sexual orientation, gender identity into state law were defeated. We called them ban the Bible bills because they would have caused those situations to happen. But it's hard, I'll be honest, as a Texan going, okay, that seems so far off in Massachusetts. It happened right here at home.
And to that point, so Nebraska had a even more aggressive of that Massachusetts bill introduced earlier this year, where it made it felony child abuse to expose your child to these teachings that affirm their biological sex. And so it wasn't just even in the counseling context. We're looking at this saying, okay, so if I have a child that's struggling with gender identity confusion, I take them to my church youth group, and the youth pastor teaches on these subject matters. Are they now seeking to convert them or, change their gender identity or whatever? And so we're seeing this even in the ability to just provide basic religious instruction consistent with the Bible. And this was in Nebraska.
So that's where we are. Joseph, you were on the front lines in Washington. What were some of the battles that you saw, and how did you combat those?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. And I will say, as I get in this, you didn't get to the detail. I now live in Dallas, in Fort Worth.
Yes.
And so last summer I relocated down here, and as I've learned, I'm supposed to say I wasn't born in Texas, but I got here as quick as I can. Right? Isn't that what I'm supposed to say?
Yes.
Okay. Well, but and you guys y'all have been very welcoming to me. So it's good to be here, and Nicole and Jonathan and just to be part of this team. But yeah, in Washington, one of the components, and they've talked about a lot of the implications for parental rights and what's going on in school. Another application of this that happened in Washington is creating a speech code that in businesses that it's discriminatory to use accurate pronouns, and where that kind of thing is going to go just in everyday business is a business, the state's supervision and in the ability to regulate and license and fine and punish a business because a business owner, as a matter of personal conviction, refuses to comply. You guys are probably aware of the case in Canada where we have the gentleman up there who now I use that term very loosely, who identifies as a woman, who's now insisting that he be waxed in the same way a woman would be waxed at these facilities because he is now a woman. And it is, of course, discrimination if the little old lady who does this doesn't want to wax his genitals. And none of us are shocked about why this little old lady who does this for women doesn't want to do this for this guy. And of course, the government is stepping in and saying, nice little old lady, you must do this, and the government is going to force you to do this. So in addition to the parents, there's a lot of implications for the business climate as well. But I do want to provide maybe a little context, because sometimes people ask, how did this happen? Like, why are we talking about this? Like, we've been going on for millennia, and everything seemed to be fine on this whole like gender thing. Why, like, over the weekend did everybody become obsessed with this? And something happened in 2015 with the Obergefell decision. When the Supreme Court redefined marriage for the whole country, there had been an entire political industry that had been created to accomplish that objective. And that political industry did not intend to hang up their, close the doors, shutter it, say, we've succeeded, we're going home, we're going to go do something else with our lives. So they needed another victim class to justify the fundraising efforts that they needed to continue doing, to justify the infrastructure that had been created. And so the pivot that was made, like the day of Obergefell, all the press releases, we're not done yet, because, and this is what they highlighted, is the fact that there's all this tremendous inequality around the idea that people think men are men and women are women, and that's determined anatomically. So that is really what happened, is this, and of course that industry, that political industry that made that happen has a lot of allies, and so their perspective was amplified far disproportionately to the number of people who hold that position. But one other point I would like to make on this, to maybe tie these things together, all the issues that we've talked about yesterday and today here, there is a theme, and really, while we're talking about policy, and Matt did a great job introducing this, when we go back to Genesis chapter 1, and we have made them male and female, and then you have the dominion mandate, and then you have the multiplication mandate. There are websites dedicated to overturning the created order in Genesis 1, as God said. And there are organizations committed to proving that what God said is true is not actually true. But let's tie all this together so we understand whether it's we talk about this often. My body, my choice. What do you associate with that when you hear that? Abortion, right? My body, my choice. But let's go a step deeper. Where's assisted suicide coming from? My body, my choice. Where's the transgender issue coming from? My body, my choice. Where's the marriage issue coming from? My body, my choice. Where's the legalizing sex work? Kamala Harris has officially taken the position that should be legal. Where's that coming from? My body, my choice. Ultimately, the difference that we have on these issues is not a political difference. There's an assumption. We have a worldview about the nature of our existence, how we came to be. Were we created, or are our lives accident? Is there purpose? Is there somebody who knows what's best for us, independent of how we feel? That is where this difference comes from. Because if you believe that your life is an accident, that my life is an accident, that there's no transcendent purpose to why we're here, my body, my choice actually makes complete sense. Because who is there to tell me otherwise? The real difference that we have here is in our assumptions about the nature of our existence. Were we created on purpose, for a purpose, by somebody who knows better for us than what our feelings might tell us? Or were we not? If you start from their assumptions of my life is an accident, where they land is totally logical. But if they're wrong, and if they were actually created by somebody who loves them and knows better and has given them instructions for how to achieve human flourishing, and that your flesh is actually broken and that it's driving you in the wrong direction, well, then you're going to see a lot of pain. And so ultimately, I think it's when we have these really heated disagreements, remember the root of all of this. It's not that they're dumb or we're dumb or they hate people or we hate people. It's that we have very different assumptions about the nature of our lives. And if we can backtrack and unwind that and figure out, is my body, my choice true? Or is it actually somebody else's body who knows better than you do, and maybe we should figure that out?
Wow. That was worth the price of admission right there. I mean, this panel was, there you go. Andrew, what would you say as someone who is fighting on the front lines in a blue state? What would your charge be to those in the audience who we are in Texas and we need to continue advancing that line? What is the charge you can leave with us to continue protecting family values?
I give that question a lot of thought after you sent it to me. I think, honestly, what you've done this past session is a great example with the Protect Chick-fil-A legislation. We had a similar type situation with the mayor of Boston several years ago, former mayor of Boston, he's since passed on, made a comment about, well, there's never going to be a Chick-fil-A in Boston because, we're an open, tolerant city. Or words to that effect, clearly it's sort of self-contradictory. But in response to that, there was this Chick-fil-A Day, which I think maybe Governor Huckabee helped sponsor. And, we promoted it on our webpage, and we were all in favor of it. I love Chick-fil-A, and we had a Chick-fil-A at the mall near our office. So we went there for lunch to be part of it. And I saw there's this huge line. I mean, there's usually a huge line at Chick-fil-A, but this was like out the door of the mall into the parking lot. And I started talking to people, and at first they were a little bit scared, like, why is this guy in a suit talking to me? Because it's Massachusetts. And I said, hey, we're just so glad you're here to support Chick-fil-A. We love Chick-fil-A. And they kind of loosened up. There were people who had driven 4 hours to stand in line for 2 hours to get a chicken sandwich. And today, there's a nice, brand new, huge standalone Chick-fil-A in the same town as my office. My 2 teenage sons work there, and it's great. And part of that is because people saw that Chick-fil-A was getting attacked for their stand on marriage, and they backed them up, just like you guys backed up Chick-fil-A here. Yeah. And I think that's so important. We saw how Drew Brees was attacked just the other day. Now, Ben Watson, who's on the roster for the Patriots, really backed him up and backed up Focus on the Family. So I love working with Focus on the Family. They're a great organization. We need to stand for these people that come under attack when they stand for the truth and rally around them so they're not isolated. And you've done that with Chick-fil-A, and keep doing that. And just be Texas. Be proud of who you are. Your state has as much cultural and economic clout as a lot of countries. So, as you go, that has a lot of influence across the country. And this family that I'm working with that has a 15-year-old daughter who thinks that she's a boy and who had DCF, which is our version of CPS, investigate them and question their priest about what the church's teaching is on transgenderism. When that was going on, and I thought they might lose custody. And who knows what happens after that, because this daughter was asking to take testosterone and the whole thing. I remember looking out the window of my office on the phone and thinking, at some point I'm going to advise this dad, pick your daughter up from the hospital, get her in the minivan, take a left out of the parking lot, and keep driving south till you hit Texas. And I mean that at some point it may come to that. So we need Texas to be Texas in the event that people need sanctuary from some of the craziness that's going on. But we're holding the line as best we can for right now. The good news is that daughter is home, and she's getting treatment for the underlying mental health issues, which is usually the case in these gender identity situations. And the last time I checked, she had a boy she was interested in. So praise God for that.
I remember we actually got to hear from the mother speak at a recent conference, and it's bizarre to me, some of the fights that we're having to fight, but just so thankful for you, Andrew, for standing on the front lines of where you are, and for being tireless and being diligent and standing for those families. I mean, that's literally changing a girl's life. And I love what Matt said at the beginning of this. All goes back to Genesis. And I feel like sometimes, in the family policy movement, we're having to fight a lot of different battles on a lot of different fronts. But we always, especially the church, we have to remember, before we go fight what we're against, we have to remember what we're for. We're for family. We're for marriage being between a man and a woman. It's the closest and most holy relationship that shows what Christ in the church is like. That's why it's sacred. That's why it's holy. And families thrive when we use God's standards. And so that's what we're for. And that's why we say the other is counterfeit, because we know what the real is. So, Joseph, tell us about, when it comes to educating the church, tell us about the initiative you're working on with the embassy at the Chuck Colson Center, how folks can hear about it and get involved, because I feel like this is a critical tool, especially where we are in the culture war.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things, I ran the Family Policy Council in Washington State for about 10 years. And when I started, I had a real passion for talking about these hard issues in a way that didn't alienate the middle. and in kind of helping the church, do a little better, and not say things that were gonna immediately alienate people. By the time I was done, I had become really passionate about inoculating the church itself, because the church is totally unprepared for the 21st century, totally unprepared, and it was like, well, I might not alienate that guy who is thinking about it, but we are losing all the young people because they're watching this cultural debate where on one side you have a bunch of people who are really confident and really aggressive, and then on the other side you have a bunch of people who are really timid and kind of embarrassed and try not to say what they actually think because they're afraid somebody's not going to like it. If you watch that, who are you going to be attracted to? The people who think they actually know what they're talking about and aren't embarrassed to tell you about it. And so you have and because of that just timidity and fear, you have people growing up in the church who never got satisfactory answers to all these questions because they don't want to talk about it because it's political. And so we don't want to do that. And so you have millions of people within the church who want to be more equipped than they are. But you have organizations, you have churches being run by people who aren't going to touch it with a 10-foot pole because that's going to get me in trouble. And that is a recipe for disaster. And so, in my last job, I created this business plan for something that I have now built at the Colson Center, which actually launched on Tuesday of this week. And if you go to whatwouldyousay.org, we are creating little 3 to 5 minute videos that answer the most common questions around faith and culture. How many genders are there? Does love make a family? Does life begin at conception? We launched the first 3 every week until Jesus comes back. We're going to be releasing more videos that answer these questions. They're little talking point formats, and we hope they will be useful to you. So go to whatwouldyousay.org. Go to youtube.com/whatwouldyousay, and you can subscribe. It's actually very helpful to us if you do subscribe there.
Please subscribe.
But that is our effort to resource people with answers to questions that we know are being asked that they have a really hard time getting answers to. So whatwouldyousay.org, youtube.com/whatwouldyousay. And it's coming soon to other social media channels yet, but we're not there yet. All right. Thank you. That's what we're doing.
So we actually got to get a sneak preview at a family policy conference. So, and just for those who don't know, I reference how Andrew's in in Massachusetts, Joseph was in Washington. So there are 39 family policy councils throughout the state that do what Texas Values does in their own state. So it's really neat that we get to work together and collaborate and encourage each other. But these are the real warriors, and I'm just so excited about this project because sometimes it's hard. It's hard to talk about these issues, especially when the left and the media, the leftist media, get all the talking points. We got to see some of these videos. They're 3 minutes, quick, and really break down the arguments in a way that you can talk about them with your friends and family. I mean, talk about a great way to educate your friends. Just go to the YouTube page and share it. Share it on your Facebook, share it on your Twitter, share it on your Instagram. This is going to be, I think, a key revolutionary tool for the church. And if we can, I mean, we've talked about it earlier today. If we can win the church in elections, if we can win the church in the culture war, frankly, I'm really not worried about the rest. If we can shift the church, then we can shift the nation. So thank you so much, Joseph, for what you're doing. This is exciting. And so last question I'm gonna pitch to Matt. What would you say seeing what you're seeing in the States?
You said it.
What would you tell us Texans?
We need courage. The courage to take a stand when it's uncomfortable, the courage to risk losing things, the courage to actually lose things in order to win these battles. And one of the best parts of my job, and that I love working with the FPCs and the clients we get to represent, is I've met so many individuals like those up here on the stage that are sacrificing a lot because of what we believe in. And I've met so many of our clients, the Jack Phillips of the world, who lost over 40% of his business because he said, I cannot celebrate a union that conflicts with God's plan for marriage for man and woman. And he lost for that. But you ask him to this day, was it worth it? He would say, absolutely, because I was taking a stand on those eternal principles that God established at the very beginning. And that is what is needed more than ever. The courage to be willing to be a plaintiff in a lawsuit. The courage to be willing to get on a local school board and stand for these issues. The courage to show up at the Capitol with my colleagues here to advocate for the principles we stand for, and the courage to say, you know what, it may cost me. I may lose my job, I may lose good face in the community, but I am standing for something that is eternal, that is true, and that is best for human flourishing and best for our country. So I think more than ever, that's what's needed, is courage to take a stand and engage.
Yeah, give him keep going. But I want to agree with Matt, and I assume that there's some pastors in this room. And one of the things that I would encourage you to do, that I think is at the root of this, is lead your churches in surrendering their reputation.
Yeah.
Because you've taught them how to surrender their money and their family and their jobs and all these things that we're supposed to give to the gospel. The problem right now in the church, as I see it, is that we care way too much about what people think about us. And we think, well, if I do that, somebody's going to misunderstand me. For sure, somebody is going to misunderstand you, and you have to be okay with that. And so we need to, I did this, this is before I took my last job, got on my knees and told Jesus, I don't care what people think about me as long as you're okay with me. And we have to start doing that. And this starts in the pulpits, frankly. It starts in the pulpits, but if the church stops caring, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I'm going to throw you back in that fire. And what was their response? "O king, we don't need to answer you in this matter, because if you do, our God, first, he can deliver us from your hand, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow to your idols." That's the answer.
Amen. Amen. I'm getting convicted. Andrew, any last words to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, just to dovetail with what Joe said, I mean, I try to preach to the choir, literally sometimes, but to focus on the people of faith in the church, because if we don't get them mobilized and educated about this, we're not going to reach everybody else. And sometimes we get pushback from pastors who say, well, we want to be a church that if we disappeared tomorrow, our community would miss us. And I know it's good, I mean, their heart's in the right place, but have you read the Beatitudes recently? That's not going to be how it works. I mean, blessed are you when you're reviled and persecuted for Christ's sake. So I agree with Joe. We need to be ready to be a people who are set apart because we worship God who is holy and we serve him and obey him. And that's going to make us look increasingly different from a lot of our neighbors.
All right, y'all give it up for this amazing panel. Thank y'all. That was awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.